Imagine waking up tomorrow in a world where the Roman Empire never collapsed, where Latin is still the dominant language of the Western world, where the Colosseum isn't just a tourist attraction, but a living, functioning monument in the capital of a 2,000-year-old superpower, where the borders that divide Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East simply don't exist. Sounds impossible, right? But in 476 AD, when the last Western Roman emperor was deposed, it wasn't inevitable. It was the result of decades of decisions, invasions, and internal decay. So what if things had gone differently? What if Rome had survived? What if the greatest empire in human history had never fallen? Today, we're diving into one of history's most fascinating alternate scenarios. Buckle up, because we're about to rewrite 2,000 years of human civilization. To understand what could have been, we first need to understand what actually happened. By the 5th century AD, the Roman Empire was in crisis. Barbarian tribes were pressing on every border. The economy was collapsing under inflation and overtaxation. The army, once the finest fighting force in the world, was increasingly made up of foreign mercenaries who had little loyalty to Rome. Political instability meant emperors came and went like seasons, often murdered by their own guards. In 476 AD, a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer deposed the teenage emperor Romulus Augustulus. The Western Roman Empire was officially over. But here's the thing. It didn't have to end this way. The Eastern Roman Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire, survived for another 1,000 years. They spoke Greek instead of Latin, but they were Romans through and through, and they proved that the Roman system could endure. So let's imagine a different timeline. Let's say that in the crucial years of the 4th and 5th centuries, Rome made different choices. Maybe they successfully integrated the barbarian tribes instead of fighting them. Maybe a strong emperor like Aurelian or Constantine emerged to restore order. Maybe the economic reforms actually worked. Whatever the reason, in our alternate timeline, Rome doesn't fall. The empire adapts, survives, and continues into the medieval period and beyond. Now, let's explore what this world would look like. The first and most obvious change: Europe would be unified. In our timeline, the fall of Rome led to centuries of fragmentation. The lands that once bowed to Caesar split into countless kingdoms, duchies, and principalities. France, Germany, Italy, Spain, these nations were born from Rome's corpse. They spent the next 1,500 years fighting each other in an endless series of wars. But if Rome never fell, none of this happens. Instead of dozens of squabbling kingdoms, you have one massive empire stretching from Britannia to Egypt, from Hispania to Syria. One government, one currency, one legal system. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, never ends. Think about what this means. No 100 Years' War between England and France, because England and France don't exist as separate nations. No devastating 30 Years' War that killed millions in Germany. No constant border conflicts over Alsace-Lorraine. No World War I sparked by nationalist tensions. Instead, you have internal stability. Sure, there would still be rebellions, civil wars, and political intrigue. Rome had plenty of that even at its height. But the kind of total war that devastated Europe again and again in our timeline? Much less likely. The Roman Empire had a genius for administration. They built roads, aqueducts, and cities across their territory. They spread a common language and legal code. If this had continued unbroken for 2,000 years, we'd be living in a fundamentally different world. Imagine infrastructure built to Roman standards, continuously maintained and improved for millennia. Imagine a legal tradition stretching back unbroken to the 12 tables. Imagine scientific and philosophical knowledge preserved and built upon without the interruption of the Dark Ages. Which brings us to our next point. In our timeline, the fall of Rome led to what historians call the early Middle Ages, popularly known as the Dark Ages. Now, that term is a bit misleading. The medieval period wasn't actually as backward as popular culture suggests. But there's no denying that the collapse of Roman civilization led to a decline in learning, technology, and living standards across Western Europe. Libraries were destroyed. Engineering knowledge was lost. Literacy plummeted. The sophisticated urban culture of Rome gave way to a rural, feudal society. It took centuries for Europe to rebuild what had been lost. But in our alternate timeline, none of this happens. The great libraries of Rome, Alexandria, Constantinople, Rome itself, continue to function and grow. The works of ancient philosophers, scientists, and engineers aren't lost or forgotten. They're copied, studied, and built upon by each new generation. Roman engineering, which gave us aqueducts, concrete, and monumental architecture, continues to advance. The scientific method, which was beginning to emerge in the Hellenistic world, develops centuries earlier. The Renaissance, which in our timeline marked Europe's rediscovery of classical learning, never needs to happen, because that learning was never lost. What does this mean for technological progress? In our world, it took until the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century for humanity to really accelerate its technological development. But with continuous Roman investment in engineering, mathematics, and natural philosophy, that acceleration could have come much sooner. Maybe we get steam engines in the 10th century instead of the 18th. Maybe we reach the moon in 1769 instead of 1969. Maybe the computer age arrives in 1900 instead of 2000. Or maybe not. Technological progress isn't automatic. It requires the right combination of resources, knowledge, and social conditions. Rome was brilliant at engineering, but they relied heavily on slave labor, which reduced the incentive to develop labor-saving devices. Still, with 2,000 years of continuous civilization, unbroken by collapse and chaos, humanity's trajectory would be dramatically different. Now let's talk about something that would be radically different. Religion. In our timeline, Christianity grew from a persecuted Jewish sect to the dominant religion of Europe. This happened largely because the Roman Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity in 312 AD and made it the state religion. In our alternate timeline, Christianity still emerges and might still become dominant. After all, in our scenario, the Roman Empire continues, and the historical Constantine was a Roman emperor. But here's where things get interesting. The relationship between Christianity and Rome would evolve very differently. In our world, when Rome fell, the Catholic Church became the keeper of Roman culture and learning. Monasteries preserved ancient texts. The Pope claimed authority over Christian Europe, often challenging secular rulers. The division between church and state, which became so fundamental to Western civilization, emerged from this post-Roman chaos. But if Rome never falls, the emperor remains the supreme authority. Church and state are united under imperial power, much like in the Byzantine Empire. You might not get the same kind of powerful independent papacy that developed in our timeline. Religious wars might also play out differently. The Protestant Reformation happened partly because of corruption in the Catholic Church and partly because of rising nationalism. In a world where Rome still rules and the Church is firmly under imperial control, would Luther's protests gain the same traction? Would we see the devastating religious wars that tore Europe apart in the 16th and 17th centuries? And what about Islam? In our timeline, Islamic armies conquered the Middle East and North Africa from a weakened, divided Byzantine Empire. But a strong, unified Roman Empire controlling the entire Mediterranean might have stopped or dramatically altered the Islamic expansion. This doesn't mean Islam wouldn't exist. The Prophet Muhammad's message would still emerge in Arabia. But the geopolitical landscape would be completely different. You might not get the great Islamic golden age of science and philosophy that happened when Islamic civilization bridged East and West. Or maybe it happens differently, as Rome and the Islamic world interact as neighbors and rivals. The cultural impact of an eternal Rome is staggering. Latin remains the universal language of the Western world. Roman architecture, Roman law, Roman customs, they don't become relics to be rediscovered and imitated. They remain living, evolving traditions. So what does the modern world look like in this timeline? First, let's talk about borders. In our world, national borders have been drawn and redrawn countless times through war, marriage, and negotiation. But in a Roman world, you have administrative provinces instead of sovereign nations. The concept of the nation-state, which came to dominate the modern world, might never fully develop. Instead, you have a supranational empire with local administration. Think of it like a much older, more established European Union, except it never needed to be formed because unity was always the default. This has profound implications for conflict. Would we have had 2 world wars if Europe had been united under Rome? Probably not in the same way. The nationalist tensions that fueled those conflicts wouldn't exist in the same form. But don't think this means world peace. A Roman Empire stretching across 3 continents would still have external enemies and internal tensions. You'd see conflicts with rising powers in Asia, perhaps wars with a united China or an expanding Mongol empire. You'd see regional rebellions and civil wars within the empire itself. Technology and science would be fascinating. With continuous advancement from Roman times, by 2025, we'd likely be far more advanced than we are now. Or maybe not. Maybe we'd be less advanced if Roman social structures, like slavery and rigid class systems, had persisted. Language would be completely different. Instead of dozens of European languages evolved from Latin, French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, you might have one evolved Latin spoken across the former empire. Or maybe regional dialects would still emerge, but they'd be recognized as dialects of the same language, like Mandarin and Cantonese in China. The concept of Western civilization would be very different. In our world, the West emerged from the fusion of Greco-Roman culture, Christianity, and the various Germanic peoples who took over after Rome fell. Without that fall, without that fusion, the cultural identity of this alternate Rome would be something else entirely. Democracy and individual rights might look different too. Rome was never a democracy. It was an empire, and emperors held absolute power. Would concepts like popular sovereignty, human rights and democracy have emerged? Maybe, maybe not. These ideas have ancient roots, but they were also shaped by specific historical circumstances in our timeline. So, what if the Roman Empire never fell? We'd be living in a world almost unrecognizable from our own. A world of unity instead of division. A world where ancient knowledge was never lost. A world where the political map of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East looks completely different. But here's the thing about alternate history. It's not just about imagining what could have been. It's about understanding what actually happened and why it matters. The fall of Rome wasn't just the end of an empire. It was a rupture that reshaped human civilization. It led to the feudal system, to the rise of nation-states, to the particular path of technological and social development that brought us to where we are today. In some ways, maybe we're lucky Rome fell. The chaos and fragmentation of post-Roman Europe eventually gave rise to competition between states, which drove innovation. It gave rise to checks on absolute power. It created the diverse, dynamic, often messy world we live in today. An eternal Rome might have been more stable, more unified, more advanced. Or it might have been stagnant, authoritarian, unchanging. A bronze colossus frozen in time, unable to adapt to the modern world. We'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain. The fall of Rome changed everything, and imagining a world where it never happened shows us just how much. What do you think? Would a world with an eternal Roman Empire be better or worse than the one we have? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more alternate history scenarios. And remember, history is full of moments where things could have gone differently. Every decision, every battle, every random event, they all shaped the world we live in today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.